Sure you always do that. Do the down, do down, yeah. Do yeah. I just want my country love. Don't believe that. I know. Oh no. Oh Lord.
Mr. Dwayne Blackbird McKnight on the lead guitar. Give it up.
Mr. Lodge Curry on the bass. Give it up!
Given a clinical approach to that is distasteful to some, even some of us musicians. So I try to keep it as brief as possible. But just for those not in the know, essentially, that was A Joyful Process, funkadelic song from an album called America Eats Its Young, which back in the days when people listened to only records was a double album, but once CDs came out, it was no longer a double album. But America Eats Its Young, and that was written by George Clinton, Bernie Worrell, and Harold Bean, and was sort of a Bernie kind of focus on the clavinet and that kind of thing, and is the first P-Funk song to feature a horn section, although we don't necessarily have a horn section here. But this is essentially the rhythm section, if you will, a piece of it, of Parliament-Funkadelic. And we're gonna be doing some songs that we've written together with my group Secret Army and from over the years, and we're gonna be playing some kind of rare P-Funk stuff from over the years as well. In terms of what is funk, I mean, I think the longer one attenuates themselves with said genre, if you want to call it that, it's more than that, but the longer one attenuates themselves with such a thing, the harder it is to maybe describe what that is. I think that maybe 10 years ago, I would have had a whole bunch of diatribes, and you know, I'm not gonna say all the ones that you always hear or read in the magazines. The one, okay, we all know about the one. The backbeat, okay, we get it, essentially. But I think there's so much more to it than that. It touches the soul of what a lot of us musicians think of as feel music or energy music. It definitely feeds into a certain something inside of us, instinctual, something inside of us more deeply rooted. And for those who don't know the history, because it is an American art form, is deeply rooted in the African-American tradition of music, and much like the blues, is very old, maybe older than we give credit to. A lot of people start funk with like Cold Sweat, stuff like that, James Brown, mid-60s, late 60s. Then other people talk about New Orleans funk. People talk about Louis Jordan, who was a sax player who played what a lot of modernists would call jazz, but what he called funk. Doesn't it kind of matter what they call it, what they write, you know? So its definition has borders that are not very constrained. It's very free in that aspect. But to call it free is definitely not necessarily the right thing, especially for those of us who've played in large funk ensembles with, you know, band leaders, famous band leaders like Mr. George Clinton, or of course James Brown, and so on and so forth. Free isn't necessarily the right word for it. So it has a form. The form is very important. But what that form has meant has transcended different things, much like Bach's music is transcendent, and I think Bernie got a lot of his stuff from Bach. This music is also transcendent. So it has its own way with a number of different genres. But when you hear funk, let's say funkadelic, playing that genre, you know, okay, yes, it's country, yes, it's gospel, yes, it's blues, it's psychedelia, it's doo-wop, it's hip-hop, it's R&B, whatever. But it's P-Funk playing, and there's a vibe to that. There's something you feel instinctively, not just on the records, but when you see the band live. And of course, that has changed over the years as well, because you're talking about a group that's been around almost 64 years. And I think people lose sight of that. I'm not saying we've all been in this band 64 years. We're not as old as what I'm saying. But I'm just saying that this band has existed for that long, for about that long. Roughly, something like that, and has transcended many different things. So what it means to play funk music can mean many different things, and what it means to play P-Funk can mean many different things, but it is both very easily definable and impossible to define. And the gray area is always stronger than one side or the other. So we're gonna keep playing some more music for you guys, but I just wanted to say hello and thank you so much again for coming out.
Told me never leave the farm, 'cause if you do you'll be in harm. Good old country work is all you need. Teach you how to sweat, how to bleed. Go to see them city bands, play them things, them a dancer swing, and the party does a party all night long. City sweet women got the nerve. They got that sweet, sweet curve, screaming through the walls, shimmying up and around the hall. I just want my girl. Just a little bit of simplification. Till the morning time, till the morning time. No, I'm feeling it till the morning time. No time. Oh yeah. Yeah. If I chose between the funk and you, it will. No.
Real kind of. The thing is, a lot of people when they hear
This is about
funkadelic music, they're like,
butt-to-butt
"Oh, it's a lot more rock than I thought." You know? It's like, well, funk is to call it just rock. Yeah, it's got rock in it, or what you would consider rock, or maybe the genre ran parallel to rock, and it also has loud guitars. There's a few different ways you could look at it, you know, but it definitely has that. Funkadelic was always the kind of more experimental feel, a little more political, and definitely more guitar dominated, where Parliament was more horns. And although they definitely talk about social things on Parliament now, but they would mask it under concept and kind of do it with a real visceral kind of cerebral way. But both bands are very cerebral in a lot of ways. Call it both bands, it's the same band, but the sound, the feel, things change. We're gonna keep going, but I just want to give you those little notes. We'll do some more for you guys.
Mr. Lodge Curry. Give it up.
crossing the finish line. Watch
watch out for warning signs. Side effects may be going blind. Ooh, silly things talking about. Oh, Lord, no. Ooh, selfish things talking and shout. Shout, shout it loud, loud. See y'all blazing a race law. Some of the ludicrous place. No one cares about your time and your space. So don't make a federal case about everything. Everybody's doing you wrong. Just think you've been doing so right. So now you sing that wrong song, and you try to stop right down. Oh, save your messy ways. Some of the ludicrous blind. No one cares about your time and your space. So don't make us such a federal case about everything. Oh, 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 oh.
Mr. Benjamin Benzel Baltimore Coward Jr. on the drums. Give it up, y'all. Let's do one more is cool.
It's not a P-Funk gig unless it goes over time. Oh, it's nuts.
We'll do one more for you guys. It's called Biological Speculation.
Really nice.
By Funkadelic, also from Americans. It's young.
We're just a biological speculation, sitting here vibrating. We don't know what we're vibrating about, and the animal instinct in me makes me wanna defend me, makes me wanna live when it's time to die. Yeah, y'all see my point. I don't mean to come on strong when I am concerned. I believe in God, though I know that law and order must prevail. Oh, if and when the laws of man is not just equal and fair, then the laws of nature overcome and do a thing. Just work by instinct. Survival is a thing. Y'all see my point. Y'all see my point. We're just a biological speculation.
A little bit more about you and how you guys came to join P-Funk. So maybe starting with Danny, given that you're closest to it. Now I've read that you met and befriended George Clinton at age 16. Is that correct?
16 or 17 years old, something like that.
Yep.
Yep. Pretty young. I entered a contest, actually, where you could make a bed sheet for George. Back when he was wearing the bed sheets, right? So you design a bed sheet for George Clinton, right? And everybody would try out in the respective cities. And in addition to piano, there's an art background in my family, a whole bunch of artists and that kind of thing. So, a little art talent, I can draw a tiny bit and just you know. And so I drew this bed sheet for George, you know, and it had all the different characters, from steel skin and aliens, and I was all P-funked out teenager, hardcore, and I won for whatever, something was Providence, Rhode Island. And I won for the Providence, Rhode Island, which I grew up in New England, grew up in Massachusetts. So went down to the show, got to deliver it to George. I got to meet the band, and this was like 97, yeah, so I was 16. And that was my first time meeting them. I've been going to shows as long as I could sneak into shows, or my sister could drive me, or whatever. And I just gave them some music. Said, I don't know if you're gonna like this, what I'm gonna listen to it, and a couple people did, and they invited me down to Florida to start working on sessions. But George was like, finish school. He said, finish college, finish high school, finish college, do what you're gonna do. And I did, and just did intermittent sessions for him, and then I was doing technician work for him, keyboard teching for Bernie Worrell and all the keyboard players through that period, Jerome Rogers and Razor Sharp Johnson, and so Then got a studio gig upon moving to Tallahassee after graduating and started working for him in the studio after about 9 months. I got the road gig, technical support, but then my first show I was already playing because Bernie was like, get up there and play, and the other guys would say the same thing. And I really came up under a lot of just legendary people, including these two amazing gentlemen right here, who I consider very much mentors in every sense of the word. And it doesn't matter that they play different instruments from me. The amount of stuff I learned from these two geniuses is just ridiculous. Among others, Billy Bass Nelson, Bernie Worrell, of course, who I studied under, and Jerome Rogers, aforementioned, Michael Cliff Payne, and it goes on and on and on. Gary Scheider, of course, Boogie Musso. So that was how I came to meet him, through a contest, and then just, stroke of luck, he liked what I did, so.
Now, Benzel Baltimore up next. So I understand that you were helped by Bootsy Collins as a baby.
Yeah, Bootsy. Have you ever heard of a drummer named Dennis Chambers? Yeah. And probably some other people passing me around backstage, because my father is the trumpet player for Parliament-Funkadelic since 1978. And I have the gift and curse to tour with him today. He's right next door to me right now. But I had a lot of great opportunities just from being under him, and I've been playing drums as long as I can remember, and I've been known for playing drums as long as I can remember. And I used to sit in at about like 13, 14, just like jump up there with live on the drums at like 14, like, let's play Fly On, which is a song written by Blackbird that I learned coming up. I actually learned the whole set at about 11. Sorry about that. I learned the whole set at about, tried to. And then there was always something you thought you knew, but you really didn't, but you thought you knew it, and then you get up there, and then you like, oh, there's some other parts. I forgot that part. But the excuse is, I'm 12. Let it go. I got the opportunity to play at Woodstock 99 at 15 years old. And from that point, they seen that I could probably play the drums now. I'm like, okay, maybe he's serious now. He might be serious, but after that, I would sit in whenever they'd be in town, which would be, I'm from Baltimore, but they'd be in Baltimore, DC, New York, Philly, all the close places. I would go there and, try to sit in on a song. Then I needed a job, and I was like, I'll set the drums up. And they're like, okay. And it's like, I'm already gonna play, because, I've been playing with drums. So it's like, okay, set the drums up, and you can play some songs. So for me, that was amazing. I was like 24, 25 at that point, right, Danny? You were in the band already? Yeah. Well, we're taking a flash forward now. Now we're going from 15 to 25, something like that. I had a job and all that, and then I quit. But then I had to get my job back so I can get unemployment. So I had to get fired again. So I went back and got fired again so I can get unemployment. And then that way I could go on tour and fund myself while I'm on tour. Yeah, nobody knows that story. That was my audition, just getting in. And then it's like, okay, you can come, we'll pay you a couple dollars and you can play drums and set up drums and be cool. And so I've been doing that for a couple years, and now I'm the only drummer. I don't know how that happened, but there's a lot of drummers out there when I started. There was at least 5 drummers when I started. And I was only playing one song unless George wanted me to play 2, or, but that was so political, but there's so many other drummers. And then they're just looking at me like, him? No, let me play. No, put him up there. It's a good experience. So I did that for a while and just hung in there, literally hung in there. And now I've been playing for about 3 years by myself. Help me out. 2, 3. Yeah, maybe. Oh, since 2015 almost. Yeah, so just trying to continue to live up to the greatness of all the great drummers that have been in the band and all the great musicians that I learned from. A lot of guys cursed me out a couple times about playing too much stuff. So I had to learn that, funk is not necessarily about playing all this stuff. it's like you're playing exciting music sometimes, but as a drummer, you have to be calm. And, you know, George is still trying to pull me back, and I'm excited. I'm still excited, like I was 15, you know, but he's like, nah, man, back up. But still play with intensity too, but relax. That's something I took, it took me a long time to actually learn how to just be able to breathe and play things relaxed, the same intensity, same speed, and stuff like that, but relax, and it comes out better, you know. So yeah, that's some of my experience. There's a lot more, but you know, there's other people to talk. Thank you.
Now I understand that you originally joined the band as a backup singer in 1978.
Oh yeah. Well, I met them, George and P-Funk, in '74 actually. I was a teenager as well. All of our stories is probably gonna start with we were teenagers. He's kind of a, you know, he'll grab young talent if he sees it. But in '74, me and my cousin Michael Hampton, who was Kid Funkadelic, we met them at a party in Cleveland, and we were playing already P-Funk music with this band that we were in, and the guys that gave the party knew these guys, Funkadelics, and we were just young guys. They were like our heroes. I met Eddie Hazel that night, Bernie Worrell, George, Gary, Tiki Fullwood, you know. I mean, it's just, those guys were the ones that made us really want to get into it, because at the time when we started listening to the Maggot Brain album, we were in high school, you know, so it was the newest thing on the block for us. And the fact that you have, you know, 5 different African Americans playing rock and roll, like was explained earlier by Danny, you know, Funkadelic is really a rock and roll band. It has R&B elements in it, but they turned the guitars up just a little bit louder than the stuff over at Motown, you know, so as young kids, we liked that, and we just got into it. I guess it's the way the kids are today with hip hop and things. It was like that for me with Funkadelic in the '70s. So, you know, later on in life, as time went on, Michael got picked up because Eddie left the band for a minute, Eddie Hazel. So they called Michael Hampton, and he went on, and then Michael was a little older than me, so I graduated a little later and did a little college, and then I met up with him like in '78, '79, and I started singing like my man said. I started doing sessions for like Brides and Funkenstein, Parliament, whatever George was producing at that time, you know. And eventually I started playing the bass a little bit later. It was, I think, Rodney Curtis was the bass player at the time in '78, and he ended up leaving and went back to school for a bit. And then they asked me if I would play bass. You know, it was a couple of guys up for grabs at that time that could have did it, but Gary Scheider, who I love, rest in peace to this day. You know, Gary Charles Scheider was the one who really recommended me to George to give me a shot. And I don't know where, you know, I guess he felt something that I could do, but I knew it was a bunch of other guys online that could have took the job, but I auditioned, which was scary, in front of Bernie Worrell and Eddie Hazel and all of those guys standing over you trying to see what you can do, but I made it, you know, so, and I've been there pretty much ever since that particular time, and been fun, you know, and it's to the point now where, you know, you see different generations come in, like Benzel. I knew Benzel, you know, his dad and I have been in the band for like 40 years, so he was a little bitty boy, you know, and he used to come around backstage and get into all kind of stuff, you know, But now I look around now, it's 2019, I'm 62 years old, and now I'm able to play with him, you know, who is a whole nother generation, which gives us a lot of energy. And Danny is the same way. He tells me he used to come and see the shows, and back in the 80s when he could barely get into shows, and we were doing it, Blackbird and myself, so. But, you know, it's been a great ride. George is announcing his retirement this year, and we're playing a lot of places, you know, probably for the last time for him. As far as the road is concerned, because he's, you know, 60 some odd years of getting beat up and, you know, coming out here entertaining at the level that he does. You know, if you've seen him perform, you know George is one of those that doesn't like to sit down a lot. And nowadays they put a chair on the stage, so, you know, he's been told to at least sit down a portion of the show, which he doesn't really. But, you know, this is supposed to be his last thing, and we're proud to be a part of it all of these years, and you know, keep looking out for different parts of it as it goes on, you know. I know funk will never stop, it'll never die, it'll just continue on, because with the help of hip hop and stuff like that, with the sampling and everything, you'll always keep on hearing it. So thank you guys from all of the years I've played, and you've seen me do it, you know, for coming out and supporting all of the funk and everybody that's involved in it. And hope we can keep it going for some more years. Like Danny's doing a lot of his music tonight, so give him a round of applause for all of his music that he's doing. And we're helping to support the next generation so we can keep going and make this a real serious institution. All right, thank you guys.
And finally, we have Blackbird McKnight. Now, Blackbird, I understand that prior to joining P-Funk in 1978, you played with the likes of Herbie Hancock, Miles Davis, and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. True that. So how did you come to meet George?
Oh, let's go back to high school. So I'm walking home one day from school, from my high school, Morningside High School. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, by the way. And went to school in Inglewood. Coming home from school one day, I heard this guitar playing across the street from the school. So I was the kind of kid back then, when I heard somebody playing guitar, I go bang on your door, because I wanted to, you know, get that information and meet people who play. And this gentleman was Ron Brimbry, who was friends with Archie Ivy, who at that time was the president of Dang Incorporated, which is the management for George Clinton. So after playing for about a year or two with Brim, he took me to Archie's house, who I didn't know played bass, and a pretty good bass player at that. We jammed, and after the jam, he said, you know, in about a year, George is gonna have a solo project, and we're probably gonna call you and ask you to come audition. That's when I started my over the glasses look like, yeah, okay. Oddly enough, about a year later, or some change, I got this call from the management. I'll never forget, it was Nina Hoover, the secretary from the receptionist, excuse me, from the organization. It's like about 4:45, and she says to me, "What are you doing at home? You got to catch a flight at 6 o'clock to go to Detroit. You got to audition for blah, 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 blah." I'm like, yeah, well, unbeknownst to me, of course. They rebooked me on a flight to go to Detroit. This was around September '78. I went and auditioned for the Brides of Dr. Funkenstein, a group that he was starting at the time. I got it. So that started everything. I think my first gig was September 26, 1978. It's argued about who where the gig was. I say Pittsburgh, but everybody says it was somebody else, someplace else. So that was my introduction into the funk. I probably met George after about 3 or 4 gigs into what they call the anti-tour, which is the tour where there was no mothership, right? No. There was nothing. It was just fatigues, and they came out and played their asses off. So I'm in the Bride's band. I'm going up the stairs in one of the venues, and George is coming down, and I heard his voice. I was like, that must be that guy. I was like, it was so many of those cats. And the funny thing is, on the West Coast, we didn't get pictures of who Parliament-Funkadelic really was. So when I came out to Detroit, I'm looking at all of these people gathered around the car. I was like, Jesus, these bugs really look like what they draw in the cartoons. Anyway, that was my introduction to the funk. And as Lyde said, I would like to thank everybody who comes out and supports funk then, now, and for the rest. I'm gonna cut it short and give the microphone back to
Open it up to the audience. So if you have a question, maybe you raise your hand, and Luke has a microphone and he's going to come around to whoever has a question. So Danny, in a 2005 documentary, George said that the vibe is more important than actually hearing yourself. And he said that it's about making faces, jamming, and having a good time. Now I'm just wondering, how challenging was it to adopt this approach?
Well,
and is it accurate?
I think in a way. I mean, I know that way before my time, when Funkadelic was first starting out, and it was Billy and Eddie and Tiki and them, they were playing so loud that the parliaments had to pantomime, right? They had to make faces and do things, and that coincides with the time when the band was no longer doing rhythm and blues, doo-wop, or anything, Motown or anything like that. It was becoming so psychedelicized. But funk thing with this, like, you know, this other pulse, and, you know, there's acid and there's all that's going on. So I think that it coincides with that time. So he probably has that correlation of it. It's about making faith. That's one of his many theories. There's a whole bunch of theories. I mean, I read an interview with, I think it was Questlove, in a magazine, where he said that the sidemen who worked for James Brown and George Clinton had the hardest jobs in the music industry. And I think that maybe that's partially true, because it's about interpretation. And I think that the staying power, we're from different places and different times, but the staying power is the interpretation of what the boss wants. I mean, it's like any job. You could work in a factory or be a teacher. Whoever your superior is, whoever that person is, your best way of interpreting their vibe is how they like you interpreting it, is how long you're going to be there. You know what I mean? If you're not doing it right, what he wants the interpretation to be, then you might not. And the interpretation might be crazy to everybody else too, but he likes it. That's the important thing. That's sort of the important thing with that. You know what I mean? And again, his staying power is the example of him being able to work it out and be right about it. So I mean, like, we're only as good as we. What Gary used to say, I'm no better than my surroundings. You know, and boy, oh boy, if that ain't true. I mean, like this. Like another one, George, turn down, play hard. That one was so deep for me at first. Turn down, play hard. And I remember Billy used to hate it. I hate that turn down and play hard. I hate that, you know. And it was weird for me at first, things like that. And even to this day, I think that there's so many people in the band, and the band shifts around and has changed through time. But there's so many people that a lot of times you may not hear yourself that night, or be seen that night, or any combination of those things, because of how many people there are and how much madness there is. But it is a controlled madness. I do have to say that. There is way more control than there is madness, if that makes sense. And I think to the average layperson, it's just kind of like, oh, it's crazy. But I think most musicians, what? Organized chaos, there you go. Exactly, that's the terminology. But you know, I think to most musicians, the reason why Parliament-Funkadelic has been so attractive to musicians, I think, over the years. Because when you go to a P-Funk show almost anywhere in the world, you know who the musicians are. Most of them are front row. And they're watching very seriously. Kind of like how Lives looks right now. That's how they are. It's like, okay, what's so-and-so going to do now? And they listen to records so much and that kind of thing. So I think that it's attractive to musicians because of the organized part. I think that there's something, they're like, wow, the way that they've magically, to people it's magic, Ooga Booga, they've weaved this together in whatever kind of way, or George has weaved this together in whatever kind of way. And I think that is the attractive thing to the expert. And to the lay person, the chaos is the attractive thing. At least that's how I think about it.
And speaking of chaos, we're talking backstage about how you often have to play songs on the spur of the moment. Like there's no set list,
Sure.
and in different keys to as you may have rehearsed.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know this. Sound guys are always blown away by this. You know, they're always asking me for set lists before the show, and that's hilarious because George is going to tell you the first song is 5 minutes before, and he'd probably change it 10 seconds before, and that's all you get. That's it. The rest of the show, just watch, listen, pay attention. Now, pay attention. That's like a thing. That's a real thing. That's not just a lie. That's some real stuff. Tighten up. Pay attention. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of watching George. Just like, I mean, not as deeply in terms of, you know, James Brown had all these, you know, signals and things with certain dance steps. It might not have been that kind of format, but it's definitely about watching him. He does have things you have to interpret, things you have to watch, and directions and stuff like that. No, we don't know what the set's going to be. To answer the question, we don't know what the set's going to be any given night. And he also may medley things without you knowing. So, like, we're doing a song in B or whatever, and then he's going to break into, I'll just use a recent example. We were doing downstroke and downstroke vamps for a while in the key of B at that ending part. And then he started doing the freeze, which Bird wrote, Sizzling Mean. Is that song in B originally? Probably not. Is it? D, C. So, yeah, so we have to immediately transpose it if we know it. And it's probably like, those who know it will try to transpose it into the correct key and play it some kind of way that's right. To fit the format of what the pulse is going on in that moment too, and in that key, and then, you know, everybody has to get in where they fit in. And either they know it or they don't. And sometimes you gotta fire yourself.
In every key.
Yeah.
I believe we should all know it.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. See, George doesn't play the instruments. He don't understand. You gotta study that stuff, really, you know. But he's from that school, you know, where most of the people that he grew up around, a lot of the Motown musicians, they were great like that. They could pick up the mic and do things, you know, that was uncanny, you know. They could hear your voice and know what key to play, know what's best for your voice. You know, he grew up in that era where musicians, you know, I won't say they came a dime a dozen, but if he knew that he had a bunch of good musicians around, he just expect them to know what's going on, you know. That's why he was never a guy that, like Prince used to fire his whole band and then just get a whole new band. George Clinton wasn't like that, you know. We're examples, we've been there for 40 years, you know. So it's like, once he fixates on whoever he likes that can do it the way he wants it, because it's really about how he wants it, and every night is different. Not only do we not know what's next, he's gonna do it differently every night. So a lot of that you don't see. He makes it look easy, we make it look easy. Everybody's having a good time, and you know, that's the main thing, but that's pretty much it.
Really different. Like, he could, like, go to the change, like, 10 minutes later than you would normally. Or 10 minutes before, or no, there is no change tonight. We're not even doing the change. Now we're doing this. Oh, okay, all right. So it's like, it's a lot of that.
It's fun after a while.
Alright, so we're running way behind schedule, so we're going to open it up for questions to the audience. So does anyone have a question of anyone? Yeah, I might go down front right here.
Oh, wow, what a great occasion. Thank you so much, everyone involved. I've got a few questions. Which one shall I ask? 1, 2, or 3? Try and ask them quickly. First thing I thought of, how do you look after your health and well-being? Because the music industry is famous for people falling apart in all different ways, both physically and mentally. Yeah, that's one question.
Maybe you guys should answer that because you're beasts at this.
I just got lucky and made it.
I mean, I'm taking vitamins and everything now, you know? Like I said, I'm 62 now, so it's like the health thing is the most important thing. Now, when I was 22, I didn't care about going to bed. You know, you party all night. The whole concept of rock and roll, period, you know. You do the gig, you know, you drugs, you know what I mean, and women and all of this and parties and, you know, and after a while now for me, now they're younger than I am, they're probably gonna stay up all night or whatever, but I'm going to bed, you know, because I can only function the next day like I want to. If I don't go to bed, I'm not gonna be able to do it. And the way George works, George does like from 100 to 120 shows a year, you know. So you're gonna get beat down. You know, a lot of it is traveling, and that hurts after a while, you know. It's a glamorous life, but it's a rough life, you know. So I just try to do my best with staying as healthy as I can. It's hard to eat right on the road. It's ridiculous. Like Blackbird is a vegetarian. You know, Danny can't eat dairy. You know, so you got a lot of things that you have to consider once you come out on the road. Benzel is a big vegetable man, you know. He gets his energy, you know, and it's like, we're stopping in these truck stops who, they don't have all of that stuff, you know, and so you just do the best you can, and like Bird said, we're glad that we're just still here to talk about it, you know, and health does play a big part of it. So thank you for that question, because it's very important that everybody knows how hard it is for us to stay healthy. You know, you hear about the drug cases and the people falling down, but, you know, the immune system is delicate. You can't keep beating it up, you know. Drinking and drugs over the time takes its toll on you. So, you know, it's just best, as you get older, you get wiser, hopefully, you know.
Does anyone else have a question?
It's really a pleasure to meet and see you guys in person, because I've been following you guys since 1970. It was my first concert, and man, I can't believe you guys are here. Just, you know, the presence of Funkadelic, you know, it's just unbelievable. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to, you know, to talk to us and everything, and because there was a time when they didn't even play Funkadelic on the radio. I remember they did, and me and my friends, we were musicians, and we thought we were so cool because we knew about Funkadelic and nobody heard it on the radio and everything. And the first concert I saw, Funkadelic used to open for bands and clean them up. They would wipe them out. It was, what's Miles, Hendrix's drummer,
Buddy Miles.
Buddy Miles, the Funkadelic, first concert I saw, Buddy Miles and Rare Earth were the main thing. But Funkadelic was the first, and we knew it. And we knew they was gonna clean them up. And they after Funkadelic, who was considered the warm-up act, man, everybody pretty much left. And Rare Earth had the big hit. They had Get Ready or something, the Temptations.
Yeah.
But man, Funkadelic was. So the question, the question is like, Lodge, I've been a big fan of yours, man. A big fan. I remember, I know Billy and Skeet
And then I remember when you came in with the electric spanking album. And I've been following you, man. I've been seeing you for years. I've been following you, man. I'm from San Francisco.
Okay.
I saw that first concert in Oakland.
Yeah.
And here I am down in Australia.
Wow.
So,
I was gonna say, what you doing over here?
oh man, it's just
It's
music.
a long story, I
You
know.
guys, yeah, man, the music, you know.
Yeah.
I'm a musician, so,
I feel you.
and
Yeah.
man, it's just.
Glad you could come out.
I know you've been with Miles and everybody, man.
I'll take that as a comment. Next, please. Do we have anyone else? Yes. Do we have anyone on the other side of the room? Who might go just there in the middle?
Hey, I was just wondering, because like you said about George, he doesn't play any instruments.
Yeah.
So when it comes to writing a song, is that fully collaborative, or does he come in with a melody and tells you what he wants to hear on the bass, guitar, drums? How does that?
Well, he for him, since he doesn't play, a lot of it just comes out of his mouth, like you said, melody. He's full of hooks and melodies. To this day, he just, it just comes out of him naturally, He doesn't know how to physically play an instrument, but he can tell you what he wants. By being a singer, you can be one of those singers that, are crooners and people are in choirs or whatever. George is basically one of those concept people. He knows music, but he knows concepts. And he understands where he wants to go with the music, And then what we do is we just embellish. We just bring what we've learned over our training, And especially Blackbird and Danny just did the whole Shake the Gate record. But Bird is one that George goes to for that kind of, if he can set him up for the melodies, just give him that grid, what he needs, and he can go forever. And he'll come to the studio like when Gary was alive, when we did vocals and stuff, he would just come to the studio and he would say what he wanted, and then he would leave. And then we wouldn't see him for a week. And then when he'd come back, we'll play, because back in those days with analog, it took us, not hours, it took weeks to do. We might work on a song for 7-8 days, until we finish it, because the production was so big in those days, So he would come, like I said, and he would leave, he'd come back, and he would hear what we did, and he would then put his part on at the very end, So, but that's how he would do a lot of writing with the band, and interactions with the band. The idea starts, because he's a lyrical genius, and he writes, he reads all the time. So that's why he, I'm not surprised that he was writing about all of this space. He's into the, he's a Trekkie, he's all of that. He's an alien to me sometimes, because I don't know where he gets a lot of the stuff that he does, but his process of recording now is pretty much the same as it always been. It's just, you have Pro Tools now. We went from analog to digital. So that was a big change in how you actually record. Analog, we used to always get a group of people, you get around the microphone, you sing, you get the band in there, you play. We never cut, all at once a lot, He always had you come in and do your part. He would start out with what they call as a man in the box, a little, it wasn't a drum machine, it was just a little more than a metronome, that we would use to get the click. And you would have to have a lot of imagination, because the drums would be normally put on last, So unlike, funk is different. Like rock and roll, the drums are first, with a lot of heavy metal stuff. But funk is like, we would cut the stuff, and we would put the drums on at the very end, and the lead vocals and stuff like that. But that's pretty much what he did, I mean, that's how he got around not having to play, and he's very good in the studio as far as like mixing and stuff like that, He's really, really, that's where, when you look on them albums and you see produced by George Clinton,
That's the time he put
that's what it's about, the production. He is one of those, but he's smart enough to have great musicians around him in all of the decades that he's been doing it. And like I said, all the way up until now where we've incorporated the younger guys. He's 77. These guys are not even 40 yet, they're in their 30s. And we're 60s, so he can relate to all generations of people to get what he needs. And his thing is to bring all of the music together. Hip hop, he's understanding that, but he still wants to, bring the funk in a way where it still has classical in it, jazz in it, country, blues, he's still trying to incorporate it all in one, which is probably when he passes away, he's gonna be known for that, you know what I mean? And he's gonna be known for like bringing probably more genres together and calling it funk than anything else. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, that's pretty much to answer your question. I hope.
Thank you.
Yes, I'll first of all just like to say congratulations on being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This question's open to all you guys, but I'd like to hear from Benzel first, just about with drumming in particular, and then open to all the instruments. Because you guys have to do it so much, improvise. How do you? What's your best advice for how to get to that level where whatever you're thinking in your head can just come out in your playing?
Getting in the basement. You probably don't have a basement, so you have to get in the garage. Get in the practice room and invest in your talent and your skill. You have to invest in yourself. And like they were saying earlier about the health, and sometimes you gotta chill, sometimes you just gotta, do your drum thing or do whatever instrument you're doing. You might have to go to bed after that. You might not be able to party all the time. You might not be able to have a whole lot of fun, but this becomes a job at some point. Most people that work jobs work 8 hours a day. So if you're playing music and you call yourself a musician, you should probably play at least 6. Well, I know that sounds like a lot, but it doesn't have to necessarily be playing all day. It could be listening to music for an hour or two, and then it could be practicing just what's coming to your mind for an hour and a half, and then you're working on maybe a couple things in a book, or just a couple little techniques or whatever. Then you might want to play the music for an hour and a half, and then you might want to go to some jam session and play there. And then you might have some friend that wants you to come to their gig and sit in, and at that point you might have played 8 hours that day. Try to do that. Or just basically just try to invest and just take it more seriously than everybody else takes it. That's basically what I would say. What about you, Dan?
Well, in terms of what I practice, I was classically trained. My parents run a piano school to this day in the Boston area, and so my family was just about, you got to do this many hours a day, regiment. And I always kept up with my classical, but in the past 5-6 years, I got back into it in a way where now it's almost all that I practice. And it's all I practice mostly is sight reading and memorization of just stupid amounts of classical stuff. Because when I'm not doing this, I'm playing classical music a lot of times. I'm primarily a pianist, and I'm a keyboardist kind of second. And I love keyboards, I love them to death, but it's about practicing on the piano for me. Yeah, I can practice on the piano, I can do anything on the keyboards. You know what I mean? If I practice on the piano, if I do. That's the regiment part, and that part has almost nothing to do with improvisation, except for that variation level that classical people applied to their music. So like, you're learning Schumann and you're doing Schumann for 100 years. After a while, you want to start doing variations on Schumann, or you're going to lose your mind playing the same thing. Once you've gotten to the point where your sight reading skills are like down pat, you want to start doing something with Schumann to make Schumann not, you know, just drilling Schumann into your brain all day. So you start doing variations. Variations bring about improvisation in the classical realm. But in terms of improvisation in this world, where it's so vital and vibrant and a big part of what George wants us to do, and just what is done, not just in funk, but in jazz and a lot of genres. For me, that stuff all came more naturally. I was always a concert pianist, so it was about how much fervor can you give, how much emotion can you give, and that's also a part of feel. You know, I feel like the shows that I felt the best about playing were the ones where I was teetering somewhere between the most control I've ever had in my life and falling completely off a cliff. And improvisation for me is exactly the same thing. If I can stay on that extremely, just like challenge myself to the point where I know I'm going to do something stupid, and then the stupid thing might be the best part of it. You'd be like, oh, that was amazing. I like that. I like that weird thing. And then over time, it's just don't be. For me, improvisation is the best way to keep myself from getting bored. And if you're bored with the improvisation, then there's a problem. You know what I mean? Because it's like, you know, so it's like a lot of times it's. I don't remember who says, Bernie said this, or somebody said this, do the most outlandish thing you can, especially with the knowledge of the theory. Because I came from a world of just theory. And it's what you do with that over time. People get all hung up on, oh, you're playing minor over a major part. Yeah, people do that. They do that in classical music. Well, this is in the key of what? What key? And, you know, when I'm playing classical music, the key changes every measure. There's something going on, what key? You know what I mean? So that's where the improvisation comes in to me. What can you find and apply from the world of everything that is correct and just make it as whatever incorrect as you want it to be and lead the way? Because then the next guy who has to solo, he's going to be like, you did that thing, that was so to the left. Well, I'm going to do this. And everybody's like, oh, that thing that you did when you did that patah, that was amazing. You know what I mean? That's the best thing about improvisation to me. You know what I mean? It's human, it's organic. You know? Live, yeah.
With improv?
Yeah.
Improv is the first thing I learned, because before you start learning technical stuff, you're trying to figure out what is going on with the instrument, whatever you're playing. So as far as I'm concerned, I was like, if I wasn't playing in key, I'm still improvising. So you figure all those technical things out later, but it starts here, man. It's what's in you. You know, I mean, if you feel like it can flow, it's gonna flow like that. You know, but you do have to, like these guys are saying, it's about practice, obviously. And the more hours you put into it, the more it gets easier for you. That's with everything. Before you crawl, you gotta walk. Before you walk, you gotta crawl. So you gotta look at it from a logical standpoint, and fingers, whether it be whatever instrument you're doing, the whole muscle thing, with memory and everything. All that just takes time, And if you got time, put it in. You'll see the results. We're all perfect examples of it, because you're not going to get to the next step unless you continue to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. I know it sounds hard, but it is work, and that's why you get paid for it after a while, You know what I mean? Bird, no problem.
I am a practiceaholic. Wake up and practice. I was so taken by practice. I'd wake up and get my little music, stand up, and just practice all day until it was time to do the gig. Until they came out with the cassette recorder. When they came out with the cassette recorder, still practice. But I got a little drum machine, and I would just start writing everything that I could, anything that I could think of that made sense, or it didn't make sense. I just recorded everything. Before I came down here tonight, I was on my computer recording.
Yeah.
Wow. So, this is. I did some of that too, but that's, yeah, I've always been like that. That's how I do it. A lot. The role wears and tears on you. I do take breaks and I get tired at times or whatever it were, but for the most part, I love to practice and I love to record and write. And it doesn't get old, it doesn't get boring. I still love it.
I was also in the practice room today. I just want to say one thing real quick. I'm the only one who was stupid enough to not wear his glasses for tonight's clinic. I wanted to look very clinical, but because I didn't, I can't exactly see, but I think a couple members of the band are actually in the audience as well. Could you stand up if you are here? Someone? Yeah? Okay, so Tanisha Nelson and Batavian Lewis, both singers with Parliament-funkadelic. Yep, give them a round. They also have their own group called Candy Apple Red. They got an album coming out soon.
Oh, wicked.
Thank you for coming.
We also got Lois and Harry back there. Harry and Lois. Stand up, guys.
All right, we're running really far behind time, so we're going to maybe have 2 more questions. We'll go right to the back there.
Hi. I just want to thank you guys for being here tonight, and I can speak for the audience and say that we're all really honoured to be in the presence of greats. I know. Especially that we're so far away in Australia, and some of us aren't old enough to have experienced some of the greats that you've mentioned. You mentioned James Brown and Prince, and just in regards to those old, Motown greats, those band leaders that would have 20, 30 people up on stage controlling everything, like you mentioned, the chaos and the control. And I know James Brown used to fine his band members and get a whole new band, like you said. But my question is, seeing as music has obviously changed as much as it has from analog to digital and everything that goes with that, and George honouring us with his longevity with playing live, are we witnessing right now, everyone in this room, are we witnessing the end of an era? Like Prince is gone and Hendrix is gone and all these people. George really is one of the last greats. And I would just like to know how you feel about this end of an era, because time moves on and yeah, we've got sampling, woohoo. But when it comes to this organic funk and that combination of chaos and control, is it over? And how do you feel about that?
Yes, it's over. No. I can only speak for myself. It's just all opinion based or whatever. I think that it is whatever you see it to be. What's in the cave? Only what you bring with you. It is all gray area. I think that there's always going to be a cycle. Every era of jazz was meant to kind of diss and move away from the last era. Classical was the same thing. Funk has existed in, like I was saying at the beginning real briefly, just trying to be real brief with it, but funk existed in a lot of different ways over time. Just to speak on funk specifically, in a lot of different ways over time, that organic funk all the way back before maybe people were calling it that, or maybe some people were and we've forgotten that. And like all things in history, stuff is forgotten, stuff is retained. The burning of the Library of Alexandria, people thought it was the end of thinking as we know it. Thought is over. The Library of Alexandria has burned down, there's no more thought, And of course, the thought would persist and things would go on, but maybe not in the same way. I think that with P-Funk, this is just me speaking, and you guys please feel free to jump in. I think with P-Funk, it's always been sort of a singularity, even when compared to other funk groups. Of course, it has things you can connect to everything. You can connect P-Funk to everything from Kiss to Dr. Dre, and from Chopin to, you know what I mean, Erykah Badu, or whatever. You can just go on and on and on and find 6 degrees of separation with the P-Funk. And so it's got all of that interconnectivity and very singular in its approach. Maybe you won't see anything like that again, but then something could have come down the line in 50 years, 100 years, 500 years, or sooner, and everybody's be like, how were we alive without, how were we living, how were we even doing music without fill in the blank, ... whoever this next thing is going to be. There's always something around the corner, you know, it's always kind of replenishing itself and starting over, or just completely starting over, retrenching and retooling. I think that's the best way of looking at it, at least the healthiest way of looking at it. Because you look at it as a closed door, that door, or just like painted over, everything is never gonna come back again. Well, maybe, but that's sort of the special thing about you being there for some part, you know, some portion of it.
I feel like most people that retire usually go back to work anyway. They do. And I feel like the difference between a lot of the people that aren't here anymore, they're not here anymore. And George is still here, so I'm sure he's gonna do something. And they're not gonna leave him alone. They're just gonna keep coming to the show. All these famous people are showing up, and they're doing that because they want him to keep doing stuff. That's why Red Hot is trying to get him to go on tour and stuff like that, because they are trying to keep him out there somewhere, or other, whether we just do it or, you know, they force him out or whatever, but something in the funk thing is going to continue, because there's still a whole lot of us out here that are willing and able to work and still bring that vibe. So it's about the vibe. We're learning from George, and we're just going to probably try to continue the vibe that he's started, and we're gonna, you know, try to run with that. It's our duty at this point.
Yeah. The thing about the question, you know, the phrase "end of an era," you know, that's I can hear that, you know, because as far as George, the organic part of it, his funk is different than everybody else's funk. There's a lot of different types of funks out there, funk this, you know, that. But George has a whole nother thing going on, and it's been going on for decades now. But as far as, I wouldn't say end of an era. I know he did his thing, and we're all gonna, you know, leave the earth sooner or later or whatever, but I think like 4 years ago in 2015, he changed his band around, you know. The era changed, you know. He, as you just met, the girls are 2 of his grandchildren, you know. And he's got a concept of it's gonna keep on going regardless. Because it's so powerful. Funk, this type of thing it's not gonna stop. It might be an end of an era. It might be an end of an era as far as the way he did it. But like what Benzel just said, it's gonna keep going, because we're all gonna keep on pushing it in some kind of way, whether we're doing it collectively, because he's instilled a lot of it in us. So there's no way it's gonna ever die. So I think you can say end of an era if you're looking at what he did in his time, but I say a beginning of a new era has started with just the family of P-Funk people that he has around him now. And he started so much, like we just came off the road, we were just here with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And if you know any history about the Peppers, they came to George and they did the album Freaky Style. This is when they first started. They wasn't even famous yet. So they came to him and he said that they're gonna be the next funky, new, baddest shit you ever seen. And at the time, when they came to Detroit, they were so punk and so new and so young that they really couldn't play well. And George, you know, you can get away with 3 chords in punk, you know. So George brought to them, like I said earlier, he's a master at concept. So he brought a whole production to them, and they learned how to record, they learned how to write, they learned so much from Mr. Clinton. So at that time, the Peppers, to me, was a new funk thing that was coming out. And this was like in the 80s, you know, they came to George in 1985. So I don't think it's ever gonna end, you know, because he's put his thing into so many people, so many important people. And a lot of these guys, like the Peppers, for an example, have become stupidly famous. I mean, like huge. So when you look at it like that, I just think it's just the beginning of the next chapter of what's going to come. So that's where I'm at with it. End of an era, but also a new era that's already starting, and it's gonna keep going and go, you know.
End? There is no end. I mean, if you look at it, hip-hop guys were influenced by jazz from the 40s, 50s, or whatever era that they drew from. I heard that, and I drew from that. So, I mean, I look at it like everything that I hear influences me, no matter whether I like it or like it a little bit, like it a lot, or whatever. And I try to use that as a vehicle to come up with something on my own. Not to try to copy or anything, you know, like that, but just to keep things going. That's the way I look at it. There's no end. There'll never be.
It's been really great to hear a bit about your personal practice, and I'd be really interested to hear a bit about your group rehearsal process. So how often, where, what's it like, and has it changed a lot, you know, between the 1970s and now?
But first of all, as a group, we don't rehearse no more. I'm glad they gave the microphone to me, right? Okay, this whole new thing, like I said, from analog to digital, it took effect on the whole process of the way people learn, you know. And, but as far as, like, when I first got in the band, we would rehearse like maybe 2 weeks before we go out on tour. And it's because we had new material out all the time, you know. It was like you were rehearsing the new material to stay current. You had the old stuff, but you had to go in, and we wasn't on the road. It was one of the things where we'd fly into a city and we rehearse for like every day, paid rehearsals, you know. You go in, start early, take a lunch break, come back, and rehearse until you stop for the day. And you just get up and do it again, and then you go out on the road. But now rehearsals with this band, this group, it's come to like sound checks, which is really sound checks, but we use that time a lot now to rehearse new material, and whatever George wants us to do at that time, he'll call rehearsals, you know, and we'll come together and see what he wants to do. And it don't necessarily be the whole group, you know, like you might, since it's a big group, you might have the rhythm section rehearse, and then you might have the vocals rehearse. And then we get together and then we do it, you know, because it's just such a big band, you know. So that's how I look at it. You good?
The practice vibe is, as Danny will tell you, is more of a individual thing. Like my whole life I've been having the importance of practice pressed on me. So from coming up in a background of gospel, jazz, and all these other things, these other grounds that I had to go through, and then you come with George, and you're not even getting rehearsal. It's just like I just did the Red Hot Chili Pepper thing, and they brought the drum set up there on one of the shows and did a double set on Give It Away, no rehearsal. Like the real rehearsal is individually learn these records yourself. Look on. That's why we got YouTube now. That's why I was saying. That's why I said you practice what you do in your mind for an hour or so. I listen to YouTube every single day, watching every drummer that I like. I watch the shows from the 70s and the 90s. I might say, use an approach at 1985 gig, and I say, oh, I'm gonna play like that tonight, or I'm gonna play like 2000, you know what I mean, or something like that. It's all there for you. And for us, once you get on this level, you can't always depend on rehearsal. I actually rehearse for rehearsal. Like, oh, we got rehearsal, so I got to go to the room and get me together so that I can come to rehearsal and be on point. If we have in rehearsal, which we're not. We're not having rehearsal, but be ready anyway. Just because George might come out and he might just say, oh, I want to do, I don't know, I'm not even going to say. But he'll say, I want to do something. And it's like, oh, I didn't rehearse that. So now I got to put my earbuds in and listen to the song 3 minutes before we start. I'm like, oh yeah, I know that one. Here we go. Bam, 1, 2, 3, here we go. So it comes down to individual rehearsal at some point and being ready. That's basically where I'm at with it.
Yeah, it's basically that. I think that my first maybe 5 years in the band, we used to still do organized rehearsals where like, okay, a new album just came out. And again, a new album might not come out that often. I remember there was a real long period where there wasn't a new studio album out, but when the new ones would come out, like I remember How Late when that came out in 2005, and they had us rehearsing for the Greek thing, and then doing like a week or whatever, and then if we go to Europe, we have to do that same material. He'd organize like a vocal rehearsal. Some of these rehearsals were long. I remember you and me had to stay with one for like 18 hours or something, just accompanying singers. So I mean, like that was still going on into the 2000s, and then with the coming of just like Lige said, the analog to digital thing made a big difference, and that transition in the digital era was a big deal too. Like what digital meant from the ADAT period through the now, was way crazy in terms of how we practice to the way it is now. George held on to the not doing tracks thing for a long, long time, to the point where, U2 and Earth, Wind & Fire were doing them decades before we were. But he finally gave in and started doing them to a very small portion of the show, but that changed the way that certain people approached or applied themselves with regards to rehearsal. And I think that changed the overall feeling about what and when and how you needed to rehearse, much like Lige said. And I think that actually goes into the studio world too, so deeply that there's a combination of the thing about George assuming you can do anything and the analog to digital transition. We'd be in the studio sometimes, and it'd be a track. It'd be like, Danny, I want you to do something on this track. Okay, cool, all right. What are you thinking, whatever feel, just do it like this. Okay, cool. So you always have a feel you want you to apply yourself to, okay. To do it. Engineer's like, you ready, Danny? Bam! 1, 2, 3, 4. We're in the session now. Now we're playing the session. Here I am. I haven't even hit the first key yet. I haven't heard this song before. I don't know what it is. I got to cue him like, have we even picked a sound yet? What key? What are we doing? And the classical guy in me is just pulling all my hair out at this point. I'm just like, this is the dumbest. Start over. Let me at least hear it. Let me hear a minute of it. That'd be amazing. Let me hear a minute of this session. That'd be incredible. You know what I mean? And if I'm lucky, if the engineer hasn't already gone to the bathroom from being sick of me pissing and moaning about it, then maybe I get to hear a little bit of it and get to do this session somewhat correctly. So it's even bled into the studio world. But then, like Benzel and myself, we have to go to sound check and be there for the technical end of working with the sound man on a daily basis. So me and Benzel will get a lot of practicing in together. And like Lige was saying, groups of us will do it, because then the rhythm section will meet together at sound check and maybe do some rehearsal, especially if George calls it. And the singers, something will have to be worked on, so somebody will call a vocal rehearsal. But it's usually some kind of natural hierarchy or organic way that we all sort of get together and feel each other out for those rehearsals. But you can never rehearse enough. You can always use more. So.
A round of applause for Danny Debrosian and Secret Army. Thanks everyone for attending, and my thanks again to our sponsors, Two Birds and Sundrome. Now.